Fred's Diner was, in part, the soul of the town. Old Fred Johnson ran the place, and while he was old and some saw him as just the friendly old guy who ran the diner, he was indeed a shrewd businessman who had Depression-age ideals instilled into him by his father who lived his parenting days throughout that cursed decade or so. Be frugal, he was taught. Be smart, and be a shark. So, when the local animatronic pizza place had started attracting his customers, he was quick to use his savings and buy them out. Two newcomers to the business, the more business-minded and affable Henry, and the creatively inclined and isolationist William. The three quickly became good friends, with Fred acting as the mentor of the two. Rebranding as Fredbear's Family Diner, the three men saw their business explode in popularity and economic stability. Adding new characters seemed inevitable. New locations were opened, and while Fred always made sure to personally oversee his original diner, the duo, Afton and Henry, were quick to expand their business opportunities, even creating new diners all around the state. And everything was good, until one day, Afton had brought to the company, which had syndicated and expanded since the time as just a local family diner, a new revolutionary technology, the spring-lock suits. Imagine, if you will, Afton would say, an animatronic character coming off stage to serve you your pizza on your special day, able to dance and sing and play all directly with you, the birthday child. Murmurs were heard and excitement reigned for the day. Tragedy, however, is the foreword of this story. No one knows what truly set them off. No one knows what really happened. Maybe the young employees entrusted with the usage of the springlock suits didn't take the necessary precautions. Maybe Afton had rushed the designs without proper stress testing and excitement for the designs. Or maybe it was just bad luck. Who knows? But when several employees ended up dead or crippled, maimed by his devices, it was obvious to Henry and Fred, as well as all members of the board of directors, that the springlocks were just too dangerous. Afton decried this incident as a singular factor, that more tests should be done, that this design was the future of the company. But none were willing to hear him, even his closest friend, Henry. But William wasn't convinced, not in the slightest, that he should stop. He knew they would see he was right if he just worked out the flaws in the design. And so, those he trusted in certain locations, namely the location closest to his own family home, with a wife, 2 sons, and a daughter, he would ask them to stress test springlock suits in secret. Unfortunately, what William had discovered is that his own son, Evan, his youngest, had been witness to one of these tragic springlock failures, and had to watch the life drain out of a teenage boy's eyes as blood seeped from a Fredbear springlock suit. Understandably, William thought, Evan was terrified and traumatized by the creations, and while it saddened William that his youngest son would never again light up in excitement at the sight of his beloved creations, he also didn't want Evan to become further traumatized. So in secret, William created a brand new elusive technology he called the ringing chip. This chip, via a simple binaural and hypnotic sound, could induce auditory, visual, and tactile hallucinations, especially in those susceptible, i.e. the children and the frightened, to such manipulation. While William did feel guilt at this point, it did seem to genuinely terrify and further traumatize his son, whatever he was seeing. Most likely recreations of his animatronic characters, William justified it in that it kept him from ever seeing any real harmful events, as it scared him away from the pizzeria indefinitely. And one day he'd tell Evan that all those horrible things he saw were fake. However, William never got to that day. You see, Michael, his older son, and many children in the neighborhood had picked up on Evan's phobia of the animatronic animals, and he was teased and bullied for it since they were so popular, namely by Michael, who'd yoinked a Foxy mask to terrify his younger brother, even going so far as to later enlist his friends in tormenting his brother, clad in animatronic masks. William scolded Michael as often as his tests would allow him, but it also seemed to keep Evan isolated and away from the restaurant, so he never really cracked down on Michael for tormenting him. While cruel, it was ultimately harmless, right? One day, things would change and Michael would stop. Evan would grow up and William would sit his boys down and tell them everything. But that day never came. Michael had ratcheted up his teasing and tormenting, so much so that William's wife, Isabella, had wanted to ease Evan's mind and against William and Evan's wishes, had arranged his party at the local diner. How could anyone have predicted what happened? How could Afton have safeguarded his child further? Should he have just revealed that he'd gone against his company's wishes, that his youngest child was right to be afraid? No, that just wasn't possible. Instead, he'd simply keep a close eye on Evan and reassure him. But circumstances never ever work out so simply, do they? So when William was called away to a different location because of a malfunctioning animatronic, he waved his hands and thought that despite everything, the staff there were competent, his older son would keep him far from the animatronics while tormenting him, and if worse comes to worse, his wife would be there. Imagine the shock as his bawling, crying wife called him.
He's gone, Ben. Evan's gone.
He drove fast, probably breaking several laws in the meantime, and when he walked into the diner, all was abuzz. Several of the higher-ups were there, even Henry, who looked at William with a mixture of pity and mourning. It wasn't until he saw his eldest son, clutching the lifeless and limp body of his youngest, that the reality had hit him. An animatronic he had designed. A son whose escalating antics he had ignored. This was his fault. The funeral came and went, and his testing of the Springlock suits took a break. His oldest son was probably just feeling as awful, if not more so, than him. But it wasn't his fault, it was William's. He could have, should have, put a stop to it. Maybe if he'd been honest with Evan, tried to reason with him, and bring him back to reality rather than try to trick him with foolish and horrific fantasies, this never would have happened. What was worse than his oldest son being racked with grief was that he was in that childish teenage mindset of defiance. William done anything he could to stop Michael from going back to that awful place. That grave. That place of death. But Michael was adamant on going there to speak to his brother. To mourn him so unrealistically seemed to spit in the face of why Evan had died, and William's grief slowly boiled into anger for his only remaining son. Why? Why wouldn't he just listen? Why did they never listen? William had been staring at the animatronic suit that had taken his youngest child's life. It was his fault. There was nothing he could do. All he could do was pick himself up and...
It's me! It's me!
The animatronic jumped to look William directly in the eye. Little white wisps staring at him from beyond.
Evan?
He quietly asked, and just as quickly the animatronic slumped down. William lunged to the animatronic's lap and quickly pawed at it, like he was hugging his son's tombstone.
I will put you back together. You believe that, don't you?
And so a new purpose in life had been born. A fire lit underneath William, and he had racked his brain. How? This flew in the face of science, of reality, of everything he believed. The possibility of it being a grief-stricken hallucination did cross his mind, but as he visited the suit, more and more incidents would occur, confirming the truth to him. Evan was still in there. He had no idea how to get him out, how to either release him, or potentially bring him back. He wanted to go to Henry, but if Henry didn't believe in his reality play Springlocks, what chance did William have of convincing him that his only dead son resided in the Fredbear suit? By then, Fred had retired mostly, only making appearances at his diner in an unofficial capacity, and Henry and Afton had become the top-ranking members of the company. Fredbear's Diner was a tainted name, and they quickly rebranded to Fazbear's Pizzeria, named after Henry's old animatronic, Fazbear. Henry had suggested maybe having an intervention of sorts over William's cruel treatment towards his son and wife and recent lack of company appearances, as well as his overall isolation, but Fred convinced him not to.
Henry, listen. The man is fighting with his demons,
Fred said.
If we villainize him, those demons might eat him alive. And the Bill we know could die.
So Henry left the man to his demons, alone. A mistake he would forever regret. William had no other ideas. It was stupid, but mostly it was risky. Not only that, but it made William queasy. Sure, it was a mostly painless process. Sure, the risk of being discovered was nil. But despite how determined he was to bring his son back, to learn more about the possession process and the attempt to bring him back, it still felt wrong. Ultimately, after days and days of brainstorming at the abandoned pizzeria location, pacing around the old service and parts room, William couldn't think of anything else. He had to recreate what the locals would call the bite of '83. As far as William could tell, the process was fairly simple. A child, if killed by an animatronic, would later go on to possess that said animatronic. But until he learned more about the process, he had no idea how it worked, why it worked, and when it worked. What were the conditions of possession? Were there limiting factors? Could you place the soul into anything? William had to test his hypothesis, so he set to work, designing a brand new animatronic, partly to test his theory, but also to just do something to get his mind off his grief and his defiant son. Plus, the company had seen William go radio silent for a while, and while he nearly vomited at the idea of continuing to work for the benefit of those that had left him to rot in loss, he had to keep up appearances to avoid suspicion. So he set to work. Schematics, tests, voice box designs, ice cream makers, claw grip tests, analyzation compumatrixes, advanced visual receptors, dense soundproof inner panels. It took him months, but as he worked, a worry did begin to creep up. His only daughter, Elizabeth, had unfortunately taken an interest in the prototype of his new animatronic.
Didn't you make her for me, Daddy? Why can't I play with her?
William thought he had learned from his mistakes. He made it clear to Elizabeth in no uncertain terms that she was not to set foot in the same room as Baby. The name only seemed to excite his daughter even more. Henry and the others seemed surprised when he asked to open up his own separate location. He told them that he wanted to go off on his own, and as he smiled, lying, in reality, with administration in his sole hands, the chances of corporate meddling or investigation were much less likely to occur. Circus Baby's Pizzeria. It was his greatest accomplishment, and some dying part of him was proud of the establishment, employees, and quality of the products and service. That part was quickly silenced as he reminded himself that this place had one purpose. He waited, and he waited. Baby was designed to wait too. Wait for one child. Alone. Vulnerable. That dying part of him cried out in protest, but he silenced it. It was too important. Evan was too important. It was necessary research. Tragedy, it seems, is still the foreword of the story. Elizabeth was drawn to Baby from the first time she'd seen the prototype. She had made the inaccurate but endearing assumption that the design was based off her. She was infatuated, so naturally, when her father was busy taking care of clients, she snuck into Baby's playroom as the children from her last show piled out. Baby seemed to lock eyes with the young girl, and a metallic tin voice echoed out.
Hello there. Do you want some ice cream? I think you would like vanilla. How did you know? I love vanilla.
And so, giddy and excited, the little Afton girl hopped, skipped, and jumped her ways into the arms of the Reaper, screaming as the metallic insides cut her to ribbons. Even as she passed on to death, she could hear the children outside laughing.
Why can't they hear me?
William had gotten the notification on his personal desktop. Capture successful. His heart rose and sank. It means that the real work had to begin. As he pressed the release button, and the mangled flesh's acrid stench reached his nostrils, William recoiled and didn't even recognize the corpse. It took him a few minutes. He couldn't believe it, denied it even to himself. He shut the animatronic back up and went home.
Where is Elizabeth?
He asked.
What do you mean? She said that we were going to bring her to work with you.
Isabella had replied. The anger, the frustration, the grief, it exploded.
All your fault.
He screamed.
The boy and now the girl.
What are you talking about?
Bella asked, frightened by the sudden explosion of rage.
She's gone.
William screamed.
All because you yet again didn't pay attention. Elizabeth is gone.
William moved quickly to cover up the incident, but was not at all surprised when Isabella, horrified at the implications of William's outburst, moved to divorce the influential engineer. He was, however, quite surprised when Henry confronted him.
You and I, we go way back, Bill, but this has gone on too long. You think hiding the schematics away in archives, going off on your own to build a secret testing ground would hide this in? What were you thinking? You know what? I don't even want to know. I came here because of what little respect I have left for you. The company's voting you out. After Robotics is yours solely, we can't take that from you, obviously. But your part in Fazbear's legacy is over.
And just as abruptly as he'd come, Henry left. He'd known. All this time, he'd known and let William build this hellish playground. Why did Henry give him the benefit of the doubt? Why? He obviously didn't believe in him anymore, not since the Springlock failures, so why? Why? William had lost everything. His 2 children dead, his wife divorced, his only living child gone with her. His company place? Gone. Whatever remained of the kind, innovative soul known as William Afton probably died in the madness that came after Henry's visit. And so, banned from stepping foot in the pizzeria, ostracized by those he called friend and family, the man who was once William Afton slowly pulled up on a small diner in the rain. He didn't have a plan, didn't have an idea of what was boiling inside of him, but when he saw Charlotte, Henry's only daughter and only remaining family, William's mind shifted to one singular thought.
I shouldn't be the only one to suffer. He doesn't deserve to continue living life freely of the pain I feel. Someone else should bear this burden.
These words echoed in his mind as he quietly, slowly stepped out of his violet sedan, and watching his step, making sure to remain quiet, he stalked up to Charlie and slipped his hands around her tiny throat, making sure to squeeze hard enough that she couldn't scream. Her eyes widened in surprise at Uncle Bill's grip, and slowly, she tried to futilely struggle. Eventually, she started to cry, most likely for her father, tears streaming down her eyes, staining her cheeks. But William didn't see any of that. He was too busy staring in on the happy scene of Freddy bringing cakes to different tables of joyful, screaming children. William smiled, and whatever remained of the good man was no longer there in his sinister eyes. When the struggling stopped, he dropped her corpse and casually strolled away, stepping into his sedan, soaked but comfortable. He would never stop. His work had only begun. He would bring back his son, his daughter, no matter how many little lives he had to snuff out, even if they hated him, even if they just wanted to pass on, because that's all Afton had left. Hey, this is Zorlin. This is kind of an episode 1 of a timeline series I'm working on. It's kind of just my take on the lore of FNAF, really. I still see a lot of people are confused by a lot of different things, and I just want to provide my way of viewing the timeline and the lore. Basically, this is just going over the origin of William Afton and what had occurred in the time periods of FNAF 2, Sister Location, and FNAF 4. So, that's kind of where the beginning of the timeline is. If you really want to know where to start, those 3 games are technically at the beginning of the timeline. I'm also going to be starting to stream the games to get a better grip on the lore and the gameplay in tandem on my Twitch, but that's besides the point. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you liked it, please leave a like and subscribe. I'll be doing more series if it's requested or if people want to see it. I could still go over what happened with Michael and William and Henry during the events of like Pizzeria Simulator, FNAF 1, FNAF 3, and then the next arc would kind of be the security breach era of the Mimic's return and stuff like that.